The Maple Leafs come up short in Beantown. The Kraken are crushing the competition, as it was indeed a wild weekend in the NFL. Hey everyone, welcome into another Sun Sports Roundtable. Rob Wong joined alongside by Steve Simmons and Michael Traikos. And gentlemen, let's begin on the ice with the Maple Leafs, who fell short in a playoff-type atmosphere game against the Bruins on Saturday night. They are, of course, a team that the Leafs are very familiar with. Hard to believe it was, 4 or 5 years ago now that these two teams met in the playoffs. It is starting to get further and further away, but if the Leafs do want to make some hay in the playoffs, Steve, they're going to have to go through the Bruins at some point. As currently constructed, can this Maple Leafs team get the job done?
I believe so. Actually, I think the Leafs match up better against Boston than they do against Tampa Bay, who they're going to have to beat to get to Boston. The thing with the Leafs and Boston, you look at the way the Bruins score, almost all of it comes from the one line. So here, the Leafs have the two lines that present a difficult matchup for Boston. And the other area that I think that they can really make hay with is, as great as Linus Ullmark has been against the rest of the National Hockey League, he doesn't have a great history against the Leafs. So I think that this is a team that actually matches well to the Leafs, sort of the way they play the game, the way they can compete, the way they score goals. And I think goaltending might be an advantage. Whereas, for example, if you play Tampa Bay and you got Vasilevsky in goal, it's a whole different story. So if they can somehow find a way to get past the Lightning in round one, I don't think Boston, as great a season as they've had, is as big a challenge as the Lightning are.
Yeah, no one's getting past Boston. Let's face it, boys. This team is just a juggernaut right now. And who saw this coming? Like, who actually thought that the Bruins would be just at the top of the class, not only in the East, but in the entire NHL? I didn't think so. Then again, I didn't think Winnipeg was going to have the best record in the West. But, back to the Bruins. Yeah, Steve's right. You lose 2 Game 7s to the Bruins. That tells you you're right in there with them. I think on Saturday we all saw that the Leafs are right in there again with them. For whatever reason, they just can't push that puck right over the goal line and actually beat them in a meaningful game right now. And, it's going to happen. I covered and Steve covered that Washington Capitals team that eventually slayed the Dragon, finally got past the Penguins. And when they did that, they were just off to the races and finally won the Cup. The Leafs are going to have to do the same. They're probably not going to get the Bruins in the first round, but if the Leafs can get past what looks like Tampa Bay in the first and see Boston in the second round, I think it's anyone's game. That being said, right now I'm still giving the edge to Boston. I think Toronto has to make some sort of move at the deadline, whether it's what we talked about last week and getting some toughness, maybe a top 6 or top 9 guy up front, or someone who can replace Morgan Riley as your number 1 defenseman, but something has to give. And the Leafs just have to load up because I think this is finally their year to get things done.
There's going to be incredible competition for the loading up because Boston's going to be trying to load up and the Leafs are going to be trying to load up and Tampa's going to be trying to load up. And you can pile almost everybody in the West who thinks they've got a shot, which is basically everybody in the West. And so everyone's going to be trying to get the same players from the same teams. It's going to be a real competition to see who can get those guys for whatever prices they're going to pay, and they're going to have to overpay for whomever they're getting. But the one thing to look at with the Bruins, remember Tampa, 4 or 5 years ago when they had the amazing season? Out first round. And Florida last year, out early. And the President's Trophy winners, and they are the President's choice in that circumstance, the President's Trophy winners don't often have great playoffs. And so Boston can have this amazing, amazing season with a new coach who's never had a playoff run of any kind. So what happens when he gets in one of those series and it's 2-2 or it's 3-2 and he's got to make some tough decisions? We don't know because we haven't seen it before.
Out west, Michael mentioned it, the Winnipeg Jets leading the way, but the Seattle Kraken are on a big-time roll here, having recently won their 8th straight game. 7 of those were on the road. The odds makers, Michael, at this point, still not giving them a great shot at winning it all this year. But do you think there is something special happening in Seattle?
You know what? I'm siding with the odds makers there, Rob. I'm not sold on Seattle. I know they're having a great season. I know they're getting scoring through all 4 lines. But when I look at an actual Stanley Cup contender, I'm looking at a team that has a a good goaltender or a great goaltender and game breakers up front. Seattle has neither. They don't have a guy in the top 75 in scoring. I know Matty Beniers is having a great year. Jerry McCann's having a year where you're going, hey, why did Toronto let this guy go? But they don't have those guys that are going to pull a team through first, second, third round of the playoffs. Marty Jones in net, the guy doesn't even have a 900 save percentage. So I'm not sold on Seattle. I think when the playoffs start, this is a team that's primed to go out in the first round, especially if Colorado ends up being a wild card team or the Oilers are a wild card team. Neither team I would want to play if I'm the Kraken, never mind maybe facing off against the LA Kings. So yeah, for whatever they're doing in the regular season, it looks great. But come playoff time, I think this is a team that's primed to go out in the first round.
So take a look at their roster. And you go through it man by man by man by man. You say, nah, he's not any good. He's not any good. He can't play. He's middle of the roster. He's bottom of the roster. Guess what? They have more goals than the Edmonton Oilers with Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl and all those guys. They have more goals per game. The Seattle Kraken, second-year team, expansion team still. I don't get it. I don't understand it. Whatever Dave Haxtell is doing, there's some magic potions there. They are outscoring the Edmonton freaking Oilers. How does that make any sense at all with the generational player of all generational players? And they got nobody with more than 31 points or whatever the number is. I don't know what the number Beniers has right now, but it's not very high compared to anything else. Who's their best defenseman? Who's their best? Do they have a 30-minute guy that the playoff teams that you need in the playoffs? No, they don't. And they don't have that center. And they don't have a second center. They don't have any of those things. All they do is win. So I'm not going to write this team off the way Dave Haxtell has them playing, the way they are believing, and that they are a team, top to bottom, 20 guys a team. They're not relying on one guy or two guys like the Edmonton Oilers are, and they have a better record and more wins and more goals scored. Please explain that to me, somebody.
Yeah, it is pretty unexplainable at this point. We'll see what kind of magic fairy dust they have the rest of the way here. Finally, the NFL wildcard weekend, always wild, and that was the case on Saturday and Sunday. We saw some incredible comebacks, of course, the Jacksonville Jaguars pulling that off and the Buffalo Bills hanging on for dear life, Steve. But which team do we think came out looking the best this weekend?
I'm going to go with the San Francisco 49ers. And to be honest, about halfway through that game, I'm thinking Brock Purdy, the rookie quarterback, the last pick in the NFL draft, he is looking vulnerable. He looks like he's about to make the big mistake, and they might blow this game against not a very good Seattle team. And all of a sudden, I think this is where coaching comes in. We saw coaching across the board making all kinds of errors and mistakes all weekend long. Kyle Shanahan wasn't among the people making those mistakes. Whatever he did at halftime, whatever he did with Purdy, whatever he did to settle that kid down in the second half, they scored 41 points, and I think it's 4 touchdowns and 4 other. They had 8 scores. How many times does a football team ever have 8 scores in a game? This looks like a team. I don't know if they're going to win the Super Bowl, but I think it's between. They're one of 4 teams I think left that can win the Super Bowl, and boy, they were impressive to me on the weekend, especially in that second half. Much more so than teams like Buffalo or Cincinnati, who weren't impressive to me in victory.
Well, super wild card weekend. Is there a better first round in sports? I know we talk about the NHL and how great the first round of the playoffs are, but that weekend right there between what Cincinnati did with that 98 fumble return for a touchdown and that Bills game that was probably closer than it shouldn't have been, but I'm going with the New York Giants and, Daniel Jones, what he was able to accomplish for the Giants was just incredible. 300 plus passing yards, 70 rushing yards, 3 touchdowns, looking very much like an MVP. Made everyone kind of forget about Eli Manning, but just an incredible weekend in the NFL, and I love what Jones was able to do for the Giants. Just looked, like I said, every bit as good as some of the big name quarterbacks in the NFL this year, and that includes Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, what have you.
Can I anoint the New York Giants Canada's team for just a moment? It's a little off the track. Brian Dable, the head coach, born in Welland, Ontario. Chris Rossetti, the head of pro scouting, is a Toronto kid, played football at St. Mike's and played quarterback at Guelph. Kevin Abrams, the assistant GM, he's also a Toronto guy. So they have a lot of Canadian connections there. You may not like the team, you may not love the team, but you got to be cheering for them from the good old Canadian point of view.
Yeah, that's a great point there. The Bills might be the first choice in Southern Ontario, but the Giants not lagging too far behind. As always, let us know your thoughts on these topics in the comments. For Steve Simmons and Michael Traikos, I'm Rob Wong. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next week on another Sun Sports Roundtable.